In 1937, Napoleon Hill published what would become one of the most destructive and harmful books to ever hit print, Think and Grow Rich. Now dubbed as one of the greatest books of the last 100 years, Hill's book revolutionized thinking around business, expectations, and the abundant life by creating a completely new genre of thought. This initial seed planted by Hill over the next 100 years would become an ever-expansive forest, a rapacious weed that seemingly could not be contained. Self-improvement. And this may seem odd to us because in our everyday lives, self-help and self-improvement, we rightly say, are everywhere. We would drown in it if it weren't mostly made up of paper and books and words on podcasts. We see it everywhere, from the shelves of Target to our children's kindergarten classrooms. You can be anything, follow your dreams. If you can just believe hard enough and think hard enough, you can achieve whatever you want. These are the things we hear and have heard for our entire lives. But to truly understand just how explosive Hill's defining book was, we need to get transported back in time. Because in 1937, self-improvement wasn't just new, it was revolutionary. So why? Well, because people couldn't think about improvement. A century ago, no one was thinking about affirmations, morning routines, and self-actualization. It was about the simple things, the meaningful things, the permanent things, the only things. Food, shelter, family life, church, what was going on around them. Anything else was secondary, if anything at all. But Napoleon Hill's revolution changed all of that. The interesting thing is that given how well Hill's magnum opus has aged over time, Hill was far from an impressive person. He was a serial failed entrepreneur. None of his books really did much or sold much. He never left much of a legacy outside of Think and Grow Rich. Many people are still under the impression that he forged a good portion of his reputation, including his association with Andrew Carnegie, the only thing that made him initially relevant and able to be listened to. And Think and Grow Rich, to that point, largely reflects that unimpressiveness. Touching on what Hill dubbed the quote-unquote 13 laws of success, the book was certainly revolutionary, but remained completely ungrounded. It talked about things like how you take your sexual desires and transmute them into building a successful company, for example. He discussed early tactics of visualization. You need to have a plan, man, he said, over and over and over and over again. But nonetheless, the effect that Hill hoped the book would have certainly manifested. Taking time to mature across time, as all things tend to do, the first generation that was fully baked in with Hill's new cultural revolution was the generation after the greatest generation went to war and defeated the Axis powers, the baby boomers. Boomers, now rightly memed and mocked about how destructive and loathsome their generation stands across time, were largely made so because of the full adoption of Hill's philosophy of quote-unquote self-improvement. What was that philosophy? Simple. Believe it, and you can be it. The successful people, according to Hill and those that followed him, are successful and so because they have a quote-unquote successful mindset, which spreads out to the rest of their lives. This is why confidence exists, for instance. If you think that you'll do well in something, if you just believe hard enough, you will eventually attract success into your life. And to give Hill some credit, there is some truth to this claim. We all are largely a liberator or prisoner of our own minds. If you set your mind to achieving a goal, you already are framed better than someone who believes they will fail in making that same attempt. In the words of this rendition of the pre-crazy Kanye West, if you're taught that you won't be able to achieve anything, you won't achieve anything. Wise words from an often unwise person. But that's where the similarities end. The proof of this is in the generation we just mentioned, the boomers. The boomers, the first generation that was immersed in self-improvement culture, did not use this in positive ways. Instead, they used it to craft an anti-culture, one that was completely opposed to anything that had made prior generations of Americans successful. One of gross, palpable, and unhinged narcissism that ran roughshod over every aspect of American life. Let's take the sexual revolution, for example. No longer was sex supposed to be confined to a monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. Now, women could quote-unquote have sex like a man. Men had every license to have an affair at work, even more so than before. Children were simply a burden for the quote-unquote liberation that a man or woman could feel without having to commit to the other person. If one happened to spring from a spontaneous tryst, for example, they were deemed, more or less, an accident. How about the hippie movement? While several anti-establishment movements of the 1960s were undoubtedly helpful, such as the anti-war and civil rights movements, the majority of them emboldened an already entitled generation, one with all the advantages they could ever ask for, to sit on their laurels, to complain, and to outsource all of their problems to other people who could supposedly fix them. They grew to hate and resent America for everything, most specifically their own failures, none of which, and still don't, they take ownership of. But the most dastardly one of all, the one that took Napoleon's Hill detached self-improvement philosophy and put it on steroids, was the self-esteem movement. Led by psychologists such as Abraham Maslow, the boomers took head on the notion that the end goal of life and all of the things in it was to feel good about yourself. If it feels good, quote unquote, do it, was the slogan. Therefore, everything about the boomer ethos was centered around feelings and whether they were validated or not. It's worth asking the question after this: is our culture better or worse because of this? The data's in, and it's not good at all. The self-esteem movement completely gutted any hope of success for anyone who bought into it wholesale. The biggest evidence of point for this is the children of the boomers, the millennials. A large reason why the millennials are so lampooned across culture to the point of Tim Dillon is they were told the exact same lies. Everyone gets a trophy. You can be anything you want. Follow your passion. When actualized to scale, self-esteem and self-improvement do the exact opposite of their names. They destroy and devolve anyone and anything who or what buys into them. But now, something remarkable has happened and is currently happening. It's ending. One of the great film quotes of this century comes from the monstrous Terence Fletcher of the film Whiplash. The maniacal orchestra instructor, played masterfully by J.K. Simmons, tells his protege Andrew Neiman, played by Miles Teller, the following, quote, "There is no sentence in the English language that is more harmful than good job," end quote. Harsh words from a harsh man. But not necessarily untrue words, as it turns out. A man who values everything values nothing, as the old saying goes, which is right. The same logic applies across other domains as well. If everything you do is a quote-unquote good job, then nothing's a good job. If you claim to quote love everything from your morning coffee to Donald Trump to your wife, do you really quote-unquote love anything? If you want to create a quote-unquote inclusive culture, what does that say when implementing definitionally exclusive things like policies and values? Words matter. It's just a matter of how seriously we take them. We have taken words surrounding self-improvement remarkably unseriously in modern times, and really for the entirety of their history, because too often we have excused what will actually improve someone's life for a shallow fallacy of what people simply want to be true. For too long, we have gone about the business of quote-unquote helping other people by offering affirmation and not correction. Too frequently, we pat ourselves on the back for being quote-unquote good and quote-unquote nice people, for simply avoiding telling people what they actually need to hear. And this behavior isn't just incorrect, by the way. It's sinful. Therefore, the entire self-improvement industry, which has climbed to billions upon billions of dollars, particularly since the internet came about, is absolutely rife with unrepentant sin. What type of sins? How about envy, indulgence, and lustful behavior, just to name a few? Have these been checked? Not at all. Have they been apologized for at all by anyone, most notably the people who have profited the most off of them? There's no one to be found, even now and especially before. America's bought this lie for nearly a century. We built our childcare system, our economy, our healthcare system, our religious institutions, and our schools around the same nonsense. To improve, you just need to be affirmed. You're perfect just the way you are, by the way. Anything that deflects against that notion is oppressive. How dare someone try to tell you otherwise? They're a quote-unquote hater. They don't want your best interest at heart. More than likely, they're looking to put you in some kind of a box, to limit you, to prevent you from self-actualizing. What do these lies cause to all the stated institutions and otherwise? The exact opposite effect that they desired, as it turns out. Dumb and foolish children, completely unprepared for adulthood. An impotent and stagnant economy, particularly for the middle and working classes. They praise the praise of lethargy and obesity. Soft and woke churches, run by soft and woke pastors who preach a social gospel, but not the actual gospel. Schools that do not raise up productive children, but gutless and mindless drones, just waiting to be programmed. The self-esteem and self-improvement psychopathy is the single most important factor for why all of America has largely been hollowed out. We used to be a country of depth and substance. Not anymore. Now, we're a country run of foolishness and parody, run by a ruling class that, unsurprisingly, is mostly comprised of boomers, all programmed with the exact same mindset that has helped to both shape and destroy our culture. But thankfully, they're not buying it anymore. A much-needed shift has started to occur, as mentioned, one that we should be very grateful for. Most importantly, it is being led by young Americans. This is not surprising when you think about it. Young Americans have come into a world comprised of this complete systemic failure to launch across all of our institutions. They're realizing one thing, and fast. They want no part of it, and are working to create something new. So the question then becomes, what is that quote-unquote something new? What is the culture that young, value-driven people, the most value-driven people in recorded American history by data, are trying to bring forth? Many have tried to answer this question, yet I have not heard a convincing answer. However, recently I got one in the form of something I had been talking about for years, but was so self-evident to me, and I would argue for many, especially for people who are watching this show, that I didn't even think of it. A couple weeks ago, my friend Ethan Morales, who is the youth pastor at my church, Red Rocks, Austin, was given the opportunity to preach a sermon on this exact topic. Having essentially started our youth ministry from nothing, giving sermons to this exact demographic once per week at minimum, and getting very ingratiated into this community from cheer events to football games, there was no one with better insight and more understanding as to just what on earth was going on with young Americans, and why they've ditched the self-improvement psyop, which is why, in many ways, the answer to that question was so simple. Because to Morales, and to everyone who really buys into it, the answer is simple. Truth. It was so simple, but when I heard it, it blew my hair back. How accurate of a phrase and a diagnosis. The biggest thing that young Americans are searching for, the reason why they've rejected self-esteem and self-improvement, as was defined in prior generations, is because it was built on lies. Lies such as, quote-unquote, you're perfect just the way you are, quote-unquote, my truth, and quote-unquote, no one can tell me what to do, are so offensive to young people now that they are choosing to reject them wholesale and entirely. But this is not without resistance from one group in particular, older generations. Past generations are coming to the same conclusion the younger generations are. They've been gypped, lied to, deceived. They are so drowning in their own Kool-Aid that they can no longer see any other way than the color of that Kool-Aid that is glazed over their eyes. They don't know what the difference is anymore between a truth and a lie. Therefore, anything different is perceived as bad and a threat to their own individual and collective identities. My grandparents are exactly like this. They're not boomers, and I love them both dearly, and they are two of my favorite people I will ever meet. But I can't help but notice that as I've aged, they've given all 11 of their grandchildren some odd advice. Focus on your career. Whenever dating happens, it happens. If you go to church, that's fine. But don't put church first on your priority list in terms of finding friendship and community. All things that they have done themselves, but yet all things that they have told me, my siblings, and my cousins explicitly not to do. The reason for this is the same. They're lies. My grandparents aren't liars, and they certainly don't want their grandchildren to suffer from them. But the truth remains. Even if their lies are unintentional or even well-meaning, it has led millions to go astray, to divorce themselves from the value-driven path. All were driven by the same thing, an obsession with mantras of self-esteem and self-improvement, both of which are completely untethered from any sort of value system at all. This is thankfully not the case today, as we'll find out as we discuss throughout this entire episode. People want truth, not affirmation, facts, not fiction, reality, not false hope. Led by the younger generations, an awakening and revival is happening in the things that were once forgotten, the things that have always been true, but our culture forgot on purpose to distract us from its purpose and from ours. To have better futures, we must be willing to go back. In addition, another positive thing that is emerging is a new sphere of cultural shifters and influencers who have survived the hustle culture and self-help deluge that we've been experiencing. This group is filled with people who are providing actual wisdom through authenticity, not posturing. They are leveraging and seeking age-old truths to give people through a modern revitalization, which we all desperately need if we are to right this ship at all. This new type of personality, which I've officially dubbed the Enlightened Bro, is something new. Gone are the days of Gary Vee, Grant Cardone, and Dan Pena, for example, hucksters and shills, who did nothing but lie to people to sell info products and invest into tech companies and real estate. In are the imperfect but refreshing class of people such as Hafiz Bayoku, Alex Hormozy, and Chris Williamson, who have learned from the mistakes of the hustle era and are making an attempt to create something better. Because regardless of how you feel about self-help, and the fact that remains is this, there are a lot of people that still need it, including me. We have many people who are still struggling mightily with everything from dating to money management to porn recovery. These are not small things at all, and it would be equally as sinful to ignore their plights simply because of the fact that we hate so much of the things that once caused them, because that doesn't solve anything. It only delays its benefits and accelerates its costs. This is also what I'm trying to build here with this show. I'm not perfect, and I'm not claiming to be. I've gotten a lot of things wrong as I made my small but not too small waves over the years. I will continue to do so, and I apologize in advance for that. But one thing I could say for certain is that I will always tell you how I actually feel. I will never lie. I have no agenda other than to lean into what we've been talking about this entire time, the thing that has begun on this journey and began me on this journey nearly 6 years ago, the truth. I'm optimistic about the future, not because I want to play a part in destroying something that has harmed people, but because I want to play a part in building something that is helping people. I believe this new self-help movement, one driven by truth and values, is that thing. We should all hope it succeeds. As Mr. Rogers once said, when things start to go wrong, look to the helpers. To make the world better, we can all afford to not just look to the helpers, but be one of them, too.